Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Interview with the Vampire. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So obviously, we are in the tutelage stage for Louis, as he's kind of this, fledgling, as Lestat keeps telling him. Obviously, the sensation of, the bliss was only the beginning, all that he was feeling last episode. Now it really, really hits him, because there's, this burning and is almost, drowning feeling that you kind of feel when I think your body's going through all this metamorphosis and changes. I even love the line where Lestat was like, we don't drink the blood of the dead, which I think is so interesting, because I was like, I don't know if too many vampire fictions touch on that. I feel like maybe True Blood would have touched on that, and it's been so long since I've seen True Blood, so I don't know. But, because it is something you don't think about sometimes. I mean, yes, eventually the heart stops and the body stops producing blood because the heart's not pumping anymore, but there's at least a decent amount of blood in a dead body, so he's like, why don't you ever, go to at least a freshly dead body? But I guess it's there's this, toxic nature to the blood of a dead human, that because Lestat was like, right, if you drink a dead man's person, we only drink living blood. If we drink dead blood, then you'll be following them in swift death as well. So I guess there's maybe something released in blood when someone dies that makes it toxic to you. So I guess it's almost interesting that it's right, something that is dead needs something living to nourish its deadness, so it's right, you need fresh living blood to survive. So it's because at first when he immediately said it, I was like, oh, is it we don't lower ourselves to drink human, but it's he immediately was like, no, it's just because it will make us sick, and it will follow humans in death to do that. So it almost actually kind of reminds me of, God, it's a spoiler for something. It came out a while ago. It even came out I think it did come out last year, didn't it? A certain show had a surprising vampire element to it. I'll leave it at that. Maybe you're aware of it. It's a certain Netflix show. I don't want to spoil it just in case anyone hasn't watched this show and did. The reveal of it being a vampire show was kind of oh, I didn't know. I mean, technically there's been two, I talked about it last year. There were two shows. I was like, oh, I didn't realize these were vampire shows. Either way, there's one show that, with how, obviously with vampirism, your senses get heightened, and with him, looking and, the way the lighting hit, I was like, oh, it kind of reminds me of vampirism and that. This particular thing kind of gave, things kind of this yellowish glow, gold glow to them, that I was like, I think it's so interesting. There's almost a little bit of that here. It kind of reminded me of that, but just kind of essentially, it's Lestat and Louis were laughing, but Louis was basically blitzed out of his damn mind. He was basically kind of drunk, more drunk than high. But obviously learning the rules of it all, about basically now you're basically an apex predator, and how you're going to these are no longer your people. They were your fellow humans. Now they're just dinner. And teaching him about right, we got to pick and choose our victims, because that guy, that sailor you want to go after, well, the problem is it's going to take literally all night to sway him and get him away from the rest of his people. But also it's he is going to be someone that is going to be noticeably missing, and that's going to draw too much attention. So point is to pick someone that won't be missed, someone that can disappear, sadly, without too much issue. And they pick a salesman. And I love that Lestat has to explain. He's like, no, you don't bite the blood, you drink it. And there you go. So that was his first victim. And I even love the conversation back and forth with him and Daniel. As you know, obviously pop back and forth, where Daniel talked about, he talks to Daniel about the conversation of, killing someone in the salesman. And it did sit with Louis. He didn't take to the killer aspect to it the way Lestat did. And and I think that leads to a really interesting question of, and there have been vampiric fictions that have talked about this, that basically it just heightens what you already are. If you were kind of an asshole before, it's just going to heighten who you were, to some extent. So I'm curious, was there some killer inside of Lestat beforehand? I mean, maybe because of his upbringing. I mean, him and Louis are kind of both, I think, have that deep-seated anger, and obviously their anger comes from different things. I mean, this episode really dives into Louis, and I think that lends itself really, because of the history of it all and what that means for Louis' life and the shit he's had to put up with, and now he, And I think there's layers to it because him being black and now having power in a situation where all the power was kind of taken from him. He couldn't, because if he ever started some shit, people would fucking kill him just like that. Without a second thought, like you are not even a second class citizen. You are even less than that, you know? And, you know, in the eyes of probably anyone else, you know? It's like, right, even like the poorest white person, you would be considered like dirt beneath their feet type of situation. So it ends up being that complexity of now you have this power. Now you're able to kind of assert yourself and have to, you know, no longer have to deal with all the bullshit you had to deal with before. Like the fact is that guy, like who was a right asshole, the guy that Louis had to do business with when he was doing stuff, like trying to like turn that business, working on that building. And the guy's like, oh, look at you. You actually do have a mind up there. And he's like tapping on Louis' head. And Louis just kind of got like the, ha ha ha. And I talked about it last episode, how Louis, when he's talking to people in particular, like white people, it's like, oh, yes, sir. Sure thing, sir. Like always having to like placate everyone around him. And for him, it was like infuriating because this guy is like, oh, look at you. You're so smart. He literally might as well have said like, oh my God, you're so smart for a monkey. Like he might as well have let the word monkey out of his mouth with the fucking vitriol and like fucking, what's the word I'm looking for? Condescending way he talked to Louis, like looking at Louis as lesson, and it's like, oh, you proved yourself. Oh my God, you're so smart. You're so clever, ain't you? And also throwing out that word to show that you're less than, boy, you know, so it's like, yeah, okay. So, and Louis was like, right, he was so filled with anger once again, because now he has the power to kind of fight back. And it's like, yeah, if it wasn't this guy, it would have been someone else. He's the one and as Louis kind of put it, he's the one that started with his fuckery. So Louis put him down, but Lestat didn't appreciate that because it's like, this is a man of the town. He will be noticed, but it's like, yeah, he made me feel less than. And it's something that he's like, right, you're not from here, so let me put it clear to you. I'm a black man. On top of that, Creole, queer, and he's even pointing to Lestat. He's like, what are you, queer, half queer? And he's just like non-discriminatory. So I guess kind of putting him on like more, I get because of that, I would put him on the more pansexual side of things. But for Louis, it's like all this stuff has made me feel weaker and less than when I shouldn't be, like, you know. And because that line, that was such a powerful line where he was like, the fact is that, because it was almost like that, oh, you're smart. Oh, you're one of the smart ones. Oh, you're one of the good ones. It's that condensation, not condensation. Condescending is the word I say condensation, condescending, you know, element to it. And Louis had said like there was something, a certain organ that was in a black man that wasn't in anyone, like a white man or anything. And that was that almost like need to make yourself smaller to kind of like that, yes, sir, no, sir. But the fact is that he's like, that what was he called him? He called him something kind of like, called him like something Negro. It was something, and he was like, the fact is, I'd go my entire life, like, I've heard it so much that now, like, I'm like, I no longer heard it anymore. But now that I'm like, no, I don't have to placate these bastards, that I'm able to just be, I'm strong now, I don't have to bend to anyone else's will, that it made him go like, you know what, fuck that, and it got his revenge, so. But he was coming at it from the perspective of Lestat could not understand because you hadn't walked a mile. And like he comes from his own circumstances. We touched on it last episode with some of the issues he had with his own father. But in the end, it's different circumstances, you know. But I thought, what I think this episode really did nicely too is it leaned into the romantic element of it. And there is some sweetness to it. Whereas Lestat's like, I can't go to sleep. I don't like going to sleep angry. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And he's like, it's like, I want to buy this place. It's like, well, that's probably not going to be a good idea, but how could I say no to you? And they're smiling at each other, coffins beside each other. It's actually, they had those moments throughout the episode. You're like, oh my God, it's actually like really, really sweet and adorable. Like especially that line of, I don't like going to bed angry. It felt like such a like married couple like thing to say. And I thought that was so adorable. So there was that element to it. I should also add this in here now because one of the people he was getting, I think, because the guy was in episode 1, I want to say he was in this episode as well. Well, he definitely was because I didn't realize this. One of the people he was talking to about business, like getting the contract signed, not the first dude, the second dude, I believe that's who it is. That's John DiMaggio. I did not realize that until I saw the credits and I was like, wait, John DiMaggio was in this? I immediately paused the episode, was like, because it was during the credits. I was like, no, I got to Google this. And I saw which character it was. I was like, of course that's John DiMaggio. I don't see him enough live at like out and about. Like I sometimes forget what voice actors look like. I mean, that's the thing. If you don't know who John DiMaggio is, he's a very prolific and well-known voice actor. I mean, like two great examples, like if you've ever watched Futurama, he voiced Bender. I don't know, he probably did other voices. I know Bender's like the main one. I don't know if I can't think off the top of my head if there's any other voices he did in that. But in Adventure Time, he played Jake. Like it's just one of those, like he's one of those voice actors, like you've heard him in like a million things. You just might not have known his name. Those are like two things that immediately come to my head, Bender and Jake. But, you know, video games, anime, it's just like, I lost my shit when I was like, it's John motherfucking DiMaggio. I was like, that's so awesome. I get giddy when I see voice actors live action wise too, just because, I don't know, it just, to me, I think that's just the coolest thing ever. Because they're not just voice actors too, they're actors too, but like their voice acting work probably ends up being the thing that kind of ends up being the biggest part of their resume. Like, to put it in perspective, I'm going on a huge tangent here, but it's part of the same conversation. It's why I got so giddy when Ashley Johnson was in, like, when Blind Spot originally aired, why I got so giddy, because I had no idea Ashley Johnson was in it, and I lost my mind because I've known her as a voice actor first before I knew her as a live action actress. Which, you know, I mean, just, it's acting in general, but it's like, I know her voiceover work before that because, you know, obviously, well, it's weird to use, like, The Last of Us as an example, but obviously, like, she mocapped Ellie and voiced Ellie. That's not always the same person. Sometimes those can be two different things. But also, like, Ben 10, specifically Alien Force On, because she played an older Gwen Tennyson. Either way, but that's kind of that same thing. Also, little side note too, just on the Ashley Johnson conversation, I didn't realize I'd actually seen her live action prior to Blind Spot, and I didn't realize it. She was in the first Avengers movie. The waitress that's like in the battle for New York, she pops up from time to time, but she's at the end, she's the one getting interviewed saying like, Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, save me. That's fucking Ashley Johnson. I had no idea until I rewatched Avengers a couple years ago. I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. Once again, tangents aside, but they're just like, I was like, John motherfucking DiMaggio, dude. That's insane. I was like, that's so cool. I'm sorry I went on this huge tangent, but I cannot believe I didn't realize that was John DiMaggio, dude. Because he's one of those voice actors, I just don't see him that often. Like, there's probably only like a hand of voice actors I probably like will recognize their like faces because I associate them. Like, he's one of the, like, now I'll make more of an intent because I just don't see his face that often. So I'm going to try and like, I'm just going to fix that going forward. It's my whole point. Either way. And I do love that Louis was like, yo, for the past, like, because he ran the business from, like, what, 1912 to 1917. He's like, for these 5 years, I made the most money. I could have retired with how much money I made because he bought up all these businesses and he changed it. He made sure some of the people got better staff. Some of the people that will work with him before, like Miss Williams, he made sure to bring them along as well and change how a lot of things roll. And he made it was... Obviously, Lestat wasn't too happy. He's like, it's kind of a bad thing to mix business with pleasure, because it was like, right, they could also use this place as a sort of, hunting ground of sorts, like to find people to pick off as well. It's like, yeah, kind of not the best to mix food with business, but still. I'm skipping over some stuff, but like circling back, I do love that Lestat taught him how to read minds, and he acts like it's nothing. He's like, yeah, it's very mundane. People come down to like, oh, I want sex, I'm hungry, I want to go home. And then he proceeds to give 3 examples of, oh, here's an example of, oh, I want something to eat, I want sex, and I love the third guy. Louis was like, hey, that's not, he's like, wait for it. And he's like, or I'm going to go home. And he's like, boom, the trifecta. It's like, I love that. That was so good. But he also brought up something interesting that now, because of the sire bond between them, like a sacrifice is that Lestat can no longer hear Louis' mind. I don't know if that's like, the way he phrased it made it seem like it wasn't like an all vampires thing. It might be just because we are like master, like we got this sire bond between us because I'm your maker, that neither one of us can read each other's mind. He made it seem more like he couldn't read Louis and that Louis could read his. Like he can, well, yeah, because they do lean into that because he is able to kind of project his thoughts into Louis' mind, but that might be considered a separate skill all on its own. Projecting your mind and reading someone's mind is very different. So, not unless it's supposed to just be like, that's Louis reading his mind. So maybe it is kind of implying like, yeah, it's just maybe the masters can no longer read their servants' minds, which that's, I'd say servant, but protege of sorts. But that's also another issue that Louis had with their dynamic because he's like, our whole thing definitely feels like especially when you call me fledgling, it does feel a lot like the word slave, you know? So, but like, I do love that you do enter that stage of like, oh man, I'm having fun with the whole vampirism thing, but obviously that fun can only last so long because Louis has to avoid his family, and he tried to keep those human connections alive, but that wasn't easy to stay. I mean, it's also a problem when you can hear someone's thoughts. He can hear his mom looking down upon him. It's like, oh, look at him wearing them shades and the way he dressed, and he got his nails done. It's like, the way she was talking about it, it was almost like she knew about his sexuality, and she was like, because she said them with such vitriol in her thoughts, and like she was looking down. He's like, I'm wearing the glasses because my eyes need to adjust, and she was almost like, oh, because Louis had read her mind. But more so than anything, like him and his mom, because she said like, oh, you haven't come to visit in like half a season. It's like, well, the last time he saw you, you were pretty much blaming him for Paul's death. That is like, oh, because it is that specifically, I think it's specifically a Catholic thing. I only know this because of the Constantine movie with Keanu Reeves, which interestingly we learned a couple weeks ago that, or maybe even longer ago, that they're doing a sequel to Tensions on all that side. That was the first instance I ever heard of like Catholicism kind of believes in like if you kill yourself, like you're going to hell, which that's one of those religious things like I super don't like that thought of like, you know, and so it's like it's one of those beliefs that I'm just like I don't like that being a thing. Like even just that being a part of anyone's belief system, I don't like that. Like your soul should be damned to like burning just because you killed, like that's some bullshit. Either way, but obviously his more so connection I think is more so to his sister because he definitely spent more time with his sister the little he was with his family. But the whole point was also like he'd been away for half a season, so 6 months. He's avoided his family, understandable. But he's also like, yeah, but I might have came around. I'm sorry about that, Mom. But it's like you didn't make much of an effort to come see me either. It's about like it's a short distance both ways. You never like attempted anything, so don't just put it all on me. You know, you haven't made it the most, I mean, considering his circumstances being one thing, but also she hasn't made it the most welcoming of circumstances. But his sister loves him, and she's like, don't make me have to track you down, and like if you go a long period of time without seeing us again, because I will slap the shit out of you for that. And he, you know, is immediately able to tell because of the heartbeats, like, oh, you're not only pregnant, you're having twins, left her some money so she was taken care of. But he kept a distance even more, and like the twins are already born, they're actually older now, and she's already got a third child. And Louis sadly could feel himself not be able to control himself around the baby and just ended up leaving. And Lesat's like, right, that's what you have to do. You know, he didn't touch on it too much, but it's like, yeah, you have to. Also, I think it is interesting that I guess it's one of those things of Lesat's like, right, you have to learn these things on your own because you could say something to someone a million times and until they go through it themselves, that's when they kind of finally learned a lesson. So it's like, right, he didn't stop Louis from going out into the sun and burning himself, and then also it is interesting too, it's not an immediate recovery either. Like Louis was kind of burned for a while. I guess like once you drink blood you start recovering, but even like in present day when he's talking to Daniel, you'll still notice his hand is burnt. So I guess it's like you probably have to drink like an extensive amount to really kick your healing factor into overdrive. But I think that's so interesting that because usually it's like oh, let's get out of the sun, and like I just obviously once again a lot of vampire stuff at the same time. I haven't watched it yet, but Let the Right One In I think aired tonight or today. I actually think it aired earlier, like on Friday, because it's one of those Showtime things. They air stuff early. But either way, I was watching Reginald the Vampire. He was in the sun. He immediately went to the mirror and he started recovering. So I guess it just, once again, it just depends on the vampire fiction. I talked about it. It's like there's a lot of vampire stuff going on all at once. I guess because zombies kind of took that place for a while. Now vampires swerving back around to be like, oh, we were the big thing for a while. We kind of went away a little bit, became zombies. Now zombies are there and we're just like sprinkling ourselves back in. I mean, truth be told, as vampires have never fully gone away. They've always still been a part of the pop zeitgeist when you had like the Vampire Diaries, True Blood, and Twilight all happening at the same time, you know, so. And then some other vampire stuff like sprinkled in here and there. Either way. But that my point is, like, Louis didn't really prepare him for that. He's almost like, oh, I should have told you something. It's like, yeah, you should have said something sooner, but Louis was determined to get home. Because he'd even said, like, his relationship with Lestat was so complicated, because it's like, right, he was my murderer, my mentor, my lover, and my master, all in, and my maker, specifically is the word he used. And it's like, that does create a very complicated relationship when he's all of those things to you all at once. And it is this thing of you try to have a relationship and you think there's, because he even said, like, there's like being in a coffin with him. He's like, I made that choice. And in the dark, we were on even footing. And even Daniel kind of points out the whole, like, oh, white master, black servant dynamic still exists in their dynamic. And because Louis could not help himself but be so entranced by Lestat. And it is this thing that he submitted so much to, you know, even at the end, like the whole guy from the opera. It's like, we'll get to that in a second, like in totality, but it was the whole thing of like, right, he jumped onto it so much. He loved the torture of it all, and Louis doesn't like killing it. He never took to it, and that's why I was bringing up earlier, maybe there was some part of Lestat, and maybe it's because he'd been a vampire longer, and Louis held on to his humanity a lot longer than Lestat did. Lestat just kind of abandoned it. It's like, I think he was quick to abandon it, and I think Louis was quick to still hold on to his. Doing little things like, oh, to keep that thread alive, he makes sure to eat like human desserts like once a week just to remind himself of that, you know, because like, right, all food, desserts, everything tastes like paste, like soap in his mouth, but it's just a reminder just to keep some human things alive in him to kind of keep in touch with his humanity. Which also, speaking of the coffin thing, I love that when Lestat got like, because Louis like, I'm not going to sleep in that, and Lestat did, and he got butt naked. I was like, you? I was like, I don't think I've ever seen anything where like a vampire got butt naked just to like sleep in their coffin. But then it's like later on we see that he's in his clothes later, him and Louis, and I'm like, oh, okay, so you were doing that just to make a point of like, oh, won't you join me? Because he's like, oh, like you can be on top, and it's like, so it did happen, we just didn't see it. But I'm like, okay, so that's more so why you were stripping naked for that purpose, so you can get some. So that was what that was about. So I was like, oh, because I was thinking like, do you strip? I mean, it's no different. I mean, I've never been one of those people that sleeps naked. I'm not, you know, well, you know, it's just never been like one of those things I will casually do that. I know people do. It's just never been my thing. So that's why I kind of, but it's like, I've never seen any vampire stuff where that happen. So for him to do that, and obviously showing that he did, I mean, I guess it makes sense considering the day back then and, technology and everything being, obviously Louis advanced everything so his coffin looks the way it does now, modern technology, but obviously back then you were limited in things, so of course you'd have such a classic vampire thing as the coffins that obviously got upgraded over the years, but still. But I think I lost the thread a little bit. Circling back, I think I was still talking about the fact is that Lestat was saying like, right, you have to leave people behind because it's just the nature of being what they are. Even that they, he's like, right, you don't have any family, but I'm still yours. And he's like, right, I won't have any children, which I'm like, you know, won't have any sons or daughters of my own. So I'm like, oh, okay, so that's probably where we start getting into the other element that, once again, the only other thing I really remember about this story is the other character that eventually gets introduced. considering where Louis is present day, I'm like, yeah, I think I remember. I definitely remember how that story ends. It doesn't have a happy ending. I just don't remember all the circumstances of it. Either way, because I think the trailer even shows some of that story. Once again, to anyone that doesn't know the story, hasn't read the book, hasn't watched the movie, which I'm assuming that's a big part of the book as well, then I won't spoil it. But you know, if you know the story, then you know what I might be referencing to. Once again, it's one of the three actors I remember from the original movie, and what that, like I said, I remember bits and pieces of that story, but that's about it. Either way, moving on. Um, we also learned a little bit more about the present day and in the past. At the time, Louis said that, no, Lestat said back then that there was only like maybe 100 vampires. There's like very few of them. I don't know whether it's just like there's just because Louis doesn't really talk about his maker, but also like what that dynamic, whatever happened there. But maybe that's something that eventually comes up later on in the show. But also like, you know, why are there so few of them? Is that because they've been hunted, or did they all, you know, potentially unalive themselves type of situation? So, but talking to Daniel, present day, he says just like tons and tons of vampires out there. Not all of them are too keen on the whole like not killing like him, because Louis says like the last time he killed was in 2000, and he's made such an extent made such a point to not do that. He never really got to the whole like he never enjoyed the murder aspect of it. He only went along with it just to indulge, not wanting to disappoint Lestat. But he has said that like some of them have their own machinations about what they want the world to be. He was like talking about, he's like, yeah, there's a brute in Madagascar, or referenced another person somewhere else in the world. And it's this situation of he's like, yeah, like vampires can hear each other's thoughts. He's like, all I have to do is stand out on a balcony, close my eyes, and I can their thoughts speed towards me, so I know what they're up to. So he probably leads the most secluded life that's not on a killing spree. Granted, he ends up was it Damek, the guy he nearly drunk to the point the guy ended up passing out. It kind of plays into the whole, because Daniel had asked the guy like at the beginning of the episode, like, oh, did you sign an NDA or something? The guy's like, no, no, no. I serve him willingly because he's a god, and it's like they're being worshipped as those. Louis in particular, but I mean, I'm sure the others are as well. To be in the presence of such glory, to be in presence of something so otherworldly, so powerful, so amazing, like to them, that's an honor enough. You know, I'm sure Louis built enough of a fortune that he's able to compensate him, I'm sure, but I mean, they probably don't even need compensation, but probably to make Louis feel better, he probably compensates him. Just like that little bit of that human pride he still had, where it's like, oh, I'm amassing enough money. It's not really a point, but he wanted to pay back out of pride every cent that Lestat spent helping him buy the businesses and stuff. But either way, they went to an opera together, and obviously, like Lestat had the suits and everything, but the problem is, Storyville, he's able to his power and position is enough that no white person's really going to say anything. Like, he's able to get through doors. But at the opera, they had to play like, oh, he was Lestat's servant, had to wait for the lights to dim for the show to really start. But either way, at the performance, I thought that was such an interesting thing, because for Louis, it's like, right, it's the one time Lestat would see people as more than just food. He would just see like that particular performer, like her performance was so beautiful, but he hated the other dude. Like, and what pissed him off even more is that no one else in the audience know how off key or off note he was, and it was bothering Lestat the most. And that's what got Louis. It's like, you killing this guy is not even for food or anything. It's not because you're hungry. You're killing him not because he's a terrible person. He treated you. It's like because he sang this operatic piece a little wrong, and that's all you want. And like, you didn't kill him slowly. You enjoyed it. You pierced his neck to the point that he was almost in this meditative state. And apparently they fed on him for like hours and stuff. And it's just like, for Louis, once again, Louis didn't enjoy the killing aspect of it, you know? But Lestat kind of wanted him to. But it's like, it is sad, you know? that you feel bad for the guy. It's like, right, he died simply because like, oh cool, he sang this note wrong and no one else in the audience noticed, and that just pissed Lestat off that much more of like, you peons can't even, because I mean he knew the original person who like wrote the piece or something like that and heard them write it and sing it like long ago, and so for him it's like, for you to butcher this piece, like especially in conjunction with the lady, she was singing it so beautifully and this guy was just like ruining it, his part in it. Either way, circling back and kind of ending this off with the whole Daniel interview, it did bring up some interesting points. Obviously, the fact is that Louis, he was almost saying that his story wasn't meant to be like this glorifying tale. It was also meant to be this warning and this sort of cautionary tale about vampirism and what it is, that it isn't all that it's like, you know, it comes with some bad sides to it as well, as kind of was kind of like the whole point he was trying to make. And because obviously Daniel kept pushing him on certain points, like, oh, did you eat your baby nephew? And it's like, no, he didn't, luckily, because there would have been no going back for that. So that's what I had brought up last episode, is like, okay, so he still has family out there. In particular, he has a sister who's married, and now we know he has twins, and also has a baby nephew. Does he eventually try to go back to that family now that they're older? You know, probably like show up at his mom's funeral if he even decides to go, and maybe be there for his sister on her deathbed. But maybe he if he doesn't mess up and end up killing his bloodline in that 100-year period between, like, obviously the early, like, 1917 at that point in the story, because it had been like 6 years or so. Well, at that point it's probably closer to probably 1918, because he was like, he had said that he was with Lestat for like 6 years, had been his fledgling. So it's like, right, it's so 100 plus years of all that. So like, if he hadn't done anything, hadn't met with his family and lost control, then there should be parts of his bloodline still out there somewhere. So, but it was interesting too, because like I brought it up before, the whole Louis eating that particular dessert. It's one he had read about from Daniel's interview. No, sorry, from one of his autobiography or something like that. And it was a dessert that was on like from the first date of Daniel and his first wife Alice's like first date or something like that. And she said that she had this very like particular thing where her eyebrow, part of it would go blonde and she would dye it brown. And he was like, yeah, I preferred it when she left it alone. And I guess that moment of just that dessert brought back some memories, and just at this time, and you know, and I think it just plays into like the whole like memories being such a thing. Obviously, like hearing Louis' story, and also like the very nature of him as a vampire. When he reads your thoughts, he could, like, because he even did it with the opera singer dude that they ended up killing. He ended up reading the guy's mind, like, you know, he could see his memories like going. Like, so that's why it's like Lestat was like, yeah, I know you. Like the moment you, so it isn't just a master and sire bond type of thing, I think, going on there, that allows him to see Louis' memory and know everything about him. It's also like the moment you taste their blood, or are able to peel that all back. He probably learned all about Louis well before Louis became a vampire, or maybe that bond makes that connection even deeper. So you do know. I don't know, but once again, I'm watching so many vampire stuff right now that I'm like, was that this or was that Reginald the vampire? I'm either way, doesn't. But it was like this quietness that the episode ended on after that moment, because after he started talking about his wife, after he started talking about his first wife, Daniel closed the laptop, because I guess he didn't want that to be part of the story. It's just kind of like let's just kind of end that there, and just they both peacefully just and quietly ate, and I'm seeing in the episode. I was like, oh, there was some like sad, there was this tragic beauty to that in some way, of just like, oh, it's just like ending on such a quiet note like that. I feel like it's such an interesting contrast to where the last episode ended in that regard, you know? But really, that's all I want to talk about. I mean, first and foremost, I'm really interested to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and Goodbye.